everyone, Zelarinth here, and today we're going to look at the unit Agatha. She is a unit that we can kind of expect to come up a little bit later in the game. If we look at the release order for the CN version, if we go down the path, we can see that Agatha is here down in the bottom left, and actually my face is kind of in the way, but she was released after Shaklulu here, as you can see, and it was right before Terror was released. So currently we have Sophia that has released, but we do know that Coco and Akambe came before Sophia, but other than that, the order has kind of been the same in that respect. So current predictions of we're probably going to see a Gust, then an Hansa, Homa, kind of in whatever order, really can be any order. And after that, I can kind of expect them to do a Kara, Shaklulu, Agatha, and Terra, and maybe their own little bit of an order. But everything is currently unknown. I mean, there is the rumors that Terra could be coming right after Sophia. None of that is currently known. All right, when we take a look at Agatha, the first thing we can see here are the factions. So we have the Drifter and then Alacrity. Knowing with Alacrity, that's the big one that I feel like will be useful to her, is that Cole has a great aura that can work quite well with her, with that increased crit. And so when we go ahead and look at her trait, we can kind of see how she works here. So when you get her at 1 star, she gains at the start of battle Wolf Awakening 1. And what Wolf Awakening is it's a buff that attack is increased by 10%, physical defense is increased by 20%, and for each layer of wound, which we'll get into wound here in a second, the target has, before attacking, the physical damage caused to it will be increased by 5%. This effect cannot be dispelled and cannot be immunized. So she basically has this as soon as she starts the fight. And as she goes up in stars, there is a second and a third version of this where it basically just gets better and better. So attack increased by 15, 20%. And then she gets a movement, 1 grid at 3 stars with this. And then at the 3 or at 5 stars, she gets Wolf Blood Awakening 3. So it's 20% physical attack and defense. Then movement is 2 squares, and she has climb and jump attained. And if the target has wound, and which we'll get to here in a second, before each attack, that you have armor piercing for each layer of wound, and the physical damage will increase by 5%. So that one is at 5 stars, of Wolf Blood Awakening 3, and as you can already see, it increases quite dramatically from the 1 to the 2 to the 3. So she's definitely a unit that first you're going to want to at least get to 3 stars and then 5 stars just for that alone in her kit. But now let's take a look at what the rest of her trait is here. So she has HP increased by 15%. So she's actually a unit that benefits from higher HP compared to a lot of other units. And after attacking for every layer of wound, okay, so wound is a debuff that increases the non-percentage penetrating damage by additional 12% and reduces healing received by 30%, and this can stack up to 4 times, and it cannot be dispelled. So you can have this stacked up 4 times, and as you can see, it applies with that trait, increases their physical damage. And it's for each layer, so you can get increased up to 20%. And then it adding 4% of Agatha's health to it, as penetration damage that can be activated up to 2 times per round. She is another unit that also ignores the frozen terrain grid, and after dealing physical damage, she'll apply 1 layer of wound up to 4 layers for 2 turns. Okay, so that's the key part of how you actually apply wounds, is for every time she deals physical damage, 1 layer will be applied, and then you can have the 4, and it lasts for 2 turns. So you can get that 4 stacks within multiple turns, and then depending on the unit, if it's like a big boss, you're going to want to keep those stacks up. And so then when we go up to the 2 stars, the increase, let's see, it goes from 4% to 7% of Agatha's health, and then it goes from, I think that's the big one on 2. And then 3 stars is it increases it to that Wolf Blood Awakening 3, which we already looked at. The HP is increased by 30%. And I believe that's everything increased on the 3 stars, but that Wolf Blood Awakening is pretty huge. Then 4 stars, it goes to 10% on the penetration damage. And then at 5 stars, you get that Wolf Blood Awakening 3. And so that is massive. You do want to get her to 5 stars to get this Wolf Blood Awakening 3, but she can work at 3 stars for a bit, but I would eventually want to get her all the way up to 5 stars to take full advantage of her kit. Now, one thing that you will see with that trait, though, that separates her from Safiya is a lot of Safiya's is HP percentage of the enemy. And so as we know in future content we've seen with CN, as well as some current content, you'll have enemies that reduce that penetrating damage to them quite dramatically if it's a percentage based on the health that they have. But then you have Agatha, who her penetrating damage or piercing damage is equal to her health. So it goes based off of her health, and so it actually can be a workaround for Safiya's weaknesses in future mutations. So what they've seen in CN current content is Safiya and August haven't been very good at the content because of a lot of these mutations that make it not advantageous to them. But Agatha has been a good unit as a workaround because it does it based off of her health, so you're not getting that reduction in damage. So when we take a look at her skills here, she actually has quite a few skills that look pretty cool in her kit. So we first have just her normal basic attack. It's a double claws. She just does 50% damage, physical damage twice. Nothing special there with her basic attack. But then we get to her initial skill. She starts right off with a skill that I think will be really good in her kit. It's Everfrost Ground. This is a 3 energy cost skill with no cooldown, and it deals ice attribute area damage equal to 35% of the current HP to all enemies in the target direction, and the target direction is a 4x3 grid, and it gains ice combat for 2 turns. And we take a look at ice combat here. Ice Combat is a buff that when on frozen terrain, damage received is reduced by 30% and movement speed is increased by 1%. So another unit like Alexi, where she gets a lot of benefits from being in the ice. So you can already kind of see some of the teams with her that she's going to work well with. She's going to work well with people like Cole because of his aura, but then also anyone that kind of deals with the ice combat. So Simona would be a huge one for her. And then you have Alexi, who would be really good with her as well, and you can really kind of control the map with all kinds of ice conditions. Okay, so when we take a look at our first ranked skills, we have Fight Off Pursuit. This is a physical damage single target attack that deals 70% damage after attacking. She performs Chase, which deals 70% damage on top of that, and then knocks back the enemy 2 squares. So this is effectively a 140% physical damage attack, and then it knocks them back 2 squares. Quite useful. I mean, as we've seen with a lot of content, that you can use knockback to easily beat some content if the enemies aren't immune to it. But we also know we're kind of starting to see in some of the mutations where they're becoming immune to knockback. So this will have its value in some content, but this probably I wouldn't use in her main kit unless there is a way to really kind of abuse it. And then so we have the other one on the first level, which is Combat Therapy. After actively attacking, heal the team with the lowest HP on the field, and the healing amount is 20% of the skill holder's physical attack. So this is just a nice little passive that can heal somebody on the team. I would definitely probably want to take Fight Off Pursuit over Combat Theory here. Alright, so when we get to the rank 3 skills, and this is just like a lot of other units, this is where you start getting into the meat and potatoes of what makes her core kit. So on the left here we have Silver Flash. This one is an instant. It's a charge to the location and deal 30% damage to all enemies within a 1x3 area in the target direction. It dispels 2 buffs on the enemies and applies 2 layers of wounds. So this is a way to get a lot of wounds on the enemies right off the bat, because you're already getting 2 wounds rather than just the 1 from a single target attack. And then you gain dodge for yourself. So she can charge into the battle, she gains dodge, she can take a hit, and it lasts for 1 round on them. And it being instant means you can cast something else, so it's quite an easy way to get up to 3 stacks. And this one has a cooldown of 3 turns. When we take a look at this skill, it's similar to Simona's, where she charges up and applies her damage to all the enemies within those 3 squares, and then she's removing their debuffs and then applying wounds to them. You'll kind of see it on, we'll show it in a couple instances here, so you can see it's 3 squares here. If there was other enemies, she could target all of them, going through them as necessary. And then you see over on the right when it's applying those wounds and removing buffs. So you can see on a couple of them, and she's hitting all the enemies in that path. But yeah, overall, quite useful skill. This one, what I will say, will be one that you'll definitely want to have. But when we go ahead and look back at her other 3rd level skill, it's going to be another case of you're probably going to want to use the Castella on one of these because you're going to want both of these for her core kit. And so her other one is the Queen's Proclamation. This is a physical damage skill that deals 80% damage to all enemies within a 3x3 area in the target direction, or in her target direction, and applies a vulnerability 2 and speed 2 down for 2 turns. So this is a nice big AoE 80% damage that can be done to a fairly large area. And then one of the big things you see with this is that it does not have a cooldown, and it costs 2 energy. So this is something that if you set up your units correctly, this could be something that you could just do every turn. And it does a fairly large area, so you may use her as a support to be able to put vulnerability on a bunch of enemies, as well as reducing their speed, and then having another big DPS come in and do the damage. And we'll see further in her kit, there are some ways to get energy to herself within her own kit. All right, we'll go ahead and take a look at this one in action. I think this one actually looks pretty cool on the map in this video here on the CN players. So you can see it in a couple of them, just an AoE, massive area that it hits, applies that vulnerability on them. And you saw on that first one too, the very first part of the video, when she first used it, it actually hit the enemies and it applied the vulnerability. I don't know which one of these, I can't read the Chinese, but one of these is that vulnerability 2. So it applied that vulnerability 2 before the barrel blew up in that big AoE range. So then the barrel went off and then did significant more damage to them. You couldn't see it completely there, but it did that additional 20% damage to them. So overall, that one is, of the 2 skills, I would say this is the more important one, but this is a very good candidate for a Castella, because I think both of them will be in my core kit for her, barring the use of one of these other ones up here, because she has actually quite a few good skills in her kit. Alright, so when we take a look at her reaction skills, we have the first one, which will be the Queen's Grace. This is a reaction when in the healthy state, you can dodge 1 melee attack per round, and when dodge is triggered, she will counterattack for 50% damage. So this was just a nice, hey, if she's healthy, which hopefully you can keep her healthy if you look at some of her other skills as we get further into them, then she has 1 dodge, so that already can dodge quite a few attacks by itself to keep her in that healthy state. And then when it is triggered, she will counterattack for 50% damage. And if you remember with her trait, she applies wounds whenever she does physical damage to an enemy. So right there is a way to apply wounds to the enemy by itself. And then you have her other reaction, which is just increases her maximum health by 12% and healing received by 30%. So this one could be, there is some situations I could see this being useful, but I would not want to use a Castella on this. I mean, they're quite rare and valuable. But this can overall be good because she does have some healing capabilities within her kit, and this could benefit her to being a little bit more tanky, but I just think the Queen's Grace is just an all-around way better, fits way better with her trait itself. When we actually take a look at this reaction here, it's quite simple, and it's just a dodge and attack back, but you can see she dodges. She didn't have any initial dodge on her besides that from the reaction, and then she just does a counterattack back to the enemy. Quite simple, but I think it's a very useful to her overall kit. So we take a look at the 11-7 skills here. We have the Smell of Prey. This is a passive. When the action starts, if there's an enemy within 6 squares of Agatha, she gains the Smell of Prey, which lasts for 2 turns and is a cooldown of 2 turns. And so when we take a look at what this actually is, so the Smell of Prey is it increases her movement by 2 squares and restores an extra energy point when she actively attacks. So right there is a way to kind of, that one is a very good skill that I could see being used alongside the Queen's Proclamation, just because you can upkeep her energy a lot better to kind of keep spamming this turn by turn. And then you have that extra movement so she can move around a lot more. So you can use her as somebody just spamming vulnerability to all the units within the map as you can. And then if you have this reactions, you know you're already dodging and counterattacking. So outright, this one is an amazing skill I could see having, and it'll be kind of dependent on the needs. Her other level 7 skills, instant, it's a heal that restores 15% health, gives her attack 2, regeneration 2, and heal 2 for 3 turns. So this one, I don't see this one being one that I would pick specifically, but it does have its situational uses. Like I said, there are some heals within her kit if you want her to be a little bit more tanky. but this one to me is a pretty easy skip, at least for the primary kit. So when we get to her 9th level skills, this is her basic attacks. So the increase, so you have the one on the left, which just increases it to 55% physical damage twice, so going from the 100% to 110%. And then you have silence, which deals 50% physical damage twice. Then it applies, they can't use active skills to enemies in the injured status that lasts for 2 turns. So this one's kind of situational. So the difference is, do you want an extra 10% damage versus being able to put an active skill, not able to use active skill on somebody that's injured. This one is, to me, this one could go either way. I don't typically like the situational ones, but what we're kind of seeing is with some units in the game, at least in the more harder content we're getting now, that I could actually see a lot more value with silence than I had in the past, because there's a lot of enemies that they're super tanky and you're going to be hitting a lot. And you're going to put them in the injured status, but it's going to be hard to knock them out right off the bat. So I do see there potentially being more value in this in the future versus just a 10% increase in your basic attack. I mean, and we're already looking at the ability to not even use your basic attack anyway, because you have ways to kind of spam these no cooldown abilities. So when we take a look at her level, or her rank 11 skills, we have Fair Duel. This is a physical damage single target attack that deals 180% damage, and before attacking, it dispels all debuffs on the target and all buffs on the target. So this one is a very big, large hit to the enemy, but it does remove all their debuffs, but it also removes their buffs. So this is, if I can see the value in this one if you're doing a fight where you don't have a significant, like you're not going big into debuffs, but the enemies are heavily buffed. This could have quite a bit of value in that aspect. But as we've already seen, debuffing the enemies is kind of core to being able to beat some of the harder content. So I don't really see me wanting to use this too often. This probably wouldn't be the one I would select up here. But this one, you can spam this one because it is a, well, I wouldn't say spam, but it's only got a 4 energy cost, but no cooldown. And then we have the one on the right, and this is the one that I would probably pick of the two on the rank 11s. We have physical damage. It's a single attack. It deals 40% damage 4 times, so 160% damage. It restores 40% of the caster's health, and when in the healthy state, it heals all allies within 3 squares of the caster, with the healing amount equal to 25% of the caster's health. So this is kind of the big one if you're going to kind of use it as a pseudo healer. And I can see this having a lot of value, especially if you're doing a mutation, as we've seen before, where your teammates are all taking little bits of damage every turn just from like a dot being applied or that. And so something like this, alongside like Coco and other little healers here and there, can keep your team topped off when you're doing some of the harder content. So this one to me is a very easy pickup for her. So we take a look at the skill here in practice. It actually looks pretty cool on screen when in use. Comes in, hits the enemy multiple times, a lot of scratchings, and then you saw right at the end there, you can see the heal coming in and healing your teammates. Comes in, heals, and then all the teammates around get a little bit of a heal. So an overall great skill there. There's a lot of content that will do little tiny amounts of damage to your entire team, and something like this can be great for keeping them topped up. That is overall all of her skills. You can kind of see that a lot of her core parts of her kit to me are going to be the Queen's Proclamation. To me, I think this is going to be something where you're just running around and hitting all the enemies with this so that your other teammates can also do increased damage. And then having like Silver Flash so that you can move around and put a lot more wounds on the targets and do more damage on them. And then when it comes to the other skill you're going to have, it's just kind of depend on the situation. If you're needing that extra little bit of healing, maybe for your team, you might go with Feast. Or maybe you're going to want to go with the Smell of Prey so you can get that extra movement and get the extra energy per turn. So this one I think will be what, like these would be the main 3 I think I would use just in my default kit. Just because that extra energy and making it a lot easier to spam this skill, I think is going to be the biggest value of her. But then even her initial skill, the Everfrost Ground, if you're going with a big ice team, like if you have Simona and Alexi, just another one where it can do, getting that ice combat, reducing the damage she takes. and giving her increased movement on ice, and it's a nice big AoE. Just another outright great attack there. Although this one does cost 3 energy, but no cooldown, versus this one only costing 2. So it's kind of, you could cycle back and forth between these two depending on how much energy you're giving your team. If you're using someone like Terror with her, then energy is never going to be a problem, and you're going to be able to spam these skills most likely, depending on who your other units are. So when it comes to her weapons, there's a few that kind of that I think would be kind of the best on her. So the first one would be Void Stab, and this is just if you're kind of going for that crit style build. If you have Cole in your team and she's taking that aura, you're already getting increased crit from that and crit damage. And so this just can outright increase her crit even more, making it a lot easier for her to pull off crits on a regular basis. She has a lot of attacks that hits multiple times, so it makes the odds of actually getting a crit more likely, at least on a couple of the attacks. So it's more, so you can predict the damage a little bit better on the crit damage. So I could see that one being really good if you go the crit side of things. But then the other good weapon is going to be one that we haven't really seen being as valuable on some of your DPSs, but this one would work really well for her because she scales based on that HP. So it gives that increased HP and grants it a bonus physical attack equal to 6% of HP at the start of battle. So I think this one is probably her best in slot just because she has an overall high HP because of her trait and all that. And this just does even more with increased HP. So she's going to be tanky in just that aspect of having a lot of health there. When it comes to her trinkets, she's kind of similar to a lot of other DPS units, and we just want the ones that kind of do that extra damage. So you have the Arm Guard with that piercing damage equal to 12%. Now this has that negative that her kit revolves around at least that piercing damage being based off her HP. And so like this one's based off the enemy's HP. So if you're doing combat in future towers where they're kind of, I won't say immune, but they take significantly reduced damage, this may have it less value than it currently does in it. But this is another way that she can apply damage to apply wounds to the enemy. So that one's good. And then you have the Roaring Flint. This is another, this one I would say is actually probably better than the Arm Guard because it is based on the character's HP. So this one versus the other one, and this one will also apply wounds to her. But then if you're kind of going that more supportive route, then you have like the Scrolls of August. I mean, this one's always good on pretty much anyone. You can never hurt to have this one if you don't have anything better and you have a ton of these sitting around. I know most people don't, but if you have, down the road, if you have a ton of these sitting around, then it's something you can always use on her. And that is Agatha. Overall, I think she is a great unit. To me, I do plan to pull for her. But as me, I'm kind of I spend money on this game, so I have a lot more pulls than your average player. And so one issue that you do kind of have with her is first, well, she wants 5 stars to really get that extra boost from that Wolfblood Awakening 3. So that is another person that you're going to have in your memory shard farm if you get her. And as we can kind of see from the CN banner release order, we don't know how this is going to shake up. They could very well just throw Agatha on the next one because we've already seen her in game, and she's actually currently a boss that we have fought. We've used her in an event, so they could always throw us a curveball and make Agatha next if they wanted to. But the big thing when we look at the CN banner is she was just surrounded by other great units. Now, we have Terra that was immediately after her, and if Agatha comes out and we don't have Terra yet, then yeah, she's going to probably have to be skipped by anybody who's free to play, just so you can guarantee you can get Terra. Because Terra to me is outright one of the best units in the game alongside Coco when it comes to that support side of things. And when it comes to DPS, we get quite a few of them. So we have like Raliwell Altar, I mean like all these next 3 units up here, Panadol and Tristan, I believe all 3 of them are DPS to some extent, or can do good damage. And then you should, if you've pulled already currently, you should have Saphia, or you might be going for a Gust. So you should have already big DPSs. So that's kind of the big negative on her, is there's just so many good units around that makes it a little bit harder to want to put pulls into her. But regardless, if she's a unit that you like, definitely go for her. She's not bad in that extent. But yeah, if you've liked this video, if you could like, comment, or subscribe, it really helps. Like I've said, I've just passed the 500 point, and I'm slowly making my way to 1,000.
And thanks for watching.